All right, make sure I hit the record button. Okay, good morning, everybody. We're back online. Last week was, as obviously everybody knows, just a crazy, crazy week. But here we are. We still don't have anything definitive from the university in terms of makeup. And so what I've done, as I think you know, and as I've tried to communicate with you, I've uploaded a pre-recorded lecture. I think I uploaded that last night under Energy 3. That covers a little bit at the outset about the power outage and then talks about natural gas and nuclear. That won't be on the exam, right, coming up on Thursday. So that's kind of a, if you're feeling lonely and you want to make a cup of tea and listen to me yapping on about natural gas and nuclear, then feel free to do that. But I didn't want to just pass over it, right? It would be, I think, quite an oversight to not cover that, especially given what happened last week. So that's more of an interest lecture. Today is going to be a review, right? I want to talk specifically about the exam, a little bit about the types of questions I answer. I want to refer to the study guide I've given you, and then I want to leave plenty of time for questions as well, whatever you would like me to go over again. So this Thursday will be the exam. Then I've developed the schedule as though we're going to continue. We'll pick up and finish off energy with renewables and then move on. If the university then says, okay, we have to make up those classes and it's going to be on a Saturday or it has to be asynchronous or whatever, then I'll rearrange the schedule again and probably build in a bit more of a buffer in terms of air pollution and perhaps biodiversity down the line. But I'll communicate those to you, I hope, as clearly as I can. Anybody got any questions or issues relating to the lecture and how we're moving forward? Feel free to fire away if you do. Okay. All right, we got 163 in the class, so that's good. Not everyone's here, but most are. And I will upload this review as well later this afternoon. Or maybe I can get it done in between now and my 12:30 class as well. But I'll get this recording up as quickly as possible. All right, so let's talk about our first little get together on Thursday, exam number 1. Okay. So you do it, whoops, hang on one sec. Let me just open the chat because I see the chat going. Sorry, Chandler, did you have a question? Someone's saying Chandler is unmuted. All good? Chandler going once, Chandler going twice. Okay. All right, so you do it online, it opens up. Yep. Just about to answer that, Olivia. Do we have to take the test during class time on Thursday? Yep. It's a synchronous class, so it's a synchronous test. You'll log on as normal. The test will open up right at 11, and you will do it live. I need your video on, please, and we'll do it live. And you'll be able to ask questions in the chat during the exam and so on, right? So you do have to take it synchronously on Thursday at 11. Question from Whitney: do we need to install Lockdown Browser for the test? Whitney, I don't do Lockdown Browser. You know, I'm a pragmatist, right? So I always start with, I'm going to assume that everybody's going to be good and use the honor code and not cheat. I also realize you can have iPads and Kindles and iPhones around you, and there's all sorts of ways to sneak stuff, right? So I don't bother with that. I set the questions where you really don't have time to sit and look things up, all right? It is a closed book test, and the timing matters. The exam is out of 50. There are 50 minutes, so it's a minute per question, and you'll need to keep moving through, right? Unfortunately, there is also no way to go back and recheck an answer. You know, I tried that in the spring of last year, and it just led to catastrophic grade inflation. And so my advice to you is to work through the exam and to budget your time and make sure that if you don't have any extended time accommodations, that if you're at the 30-minute mark, that you've gone through, pretty much the first 25 to 30 questions, something like that. You bet.
If we have extra time, is that going to already be like allotted in our test, or do we have to tell you ahead of time?
No, you don't have to tell me. So Keegan, what I'm going to do later tonight is I'll send out an email to the class. So I'll say it here and I'll send out a reminder email. Please send me an email over the next 24 hours. Just say, please remember my extended time. I've got the accommodations list. I've got that all programmed into the exam. So Keegan, what will happen is if you get 50% extended time, it'll automatically add 25 minutes. So I've got that all set up. But I just want to make sure that I haven't missed someone, so that someone hasn't gotten lost in translation. So you'll see an email from me, and all I need from you is please remember my accommodations, and I'll just double check the emails against the list that I currently have.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay, so here's my approach, right? My approach to an exam is not to simply test your recall skills, right? This is not 50 multiple choice that are based on knowledge-based questions, right? And I'm going to give you 4 examples of the types of questions that I ask. And then I'm going to talk about the study guide and give you some suggestions, right? But my goal in an exam is absolutely to determine if you understand the material and how you can apply that material, right? In terms of the objectives of the course. My goal is to get you to scratch your head a little bit, to think, rather than just rely on regurgitation. Yep, certain facts are important, right? So, for example, let's think. Well, okay, let's say the population of the world is 7.8 billion. I would assume that you would know that, and that's an important fact, right? But so is context, okay? Context being, what is the implication of adding another 2.5 billion people to the population, right? What does that mean in terms of the environment and food? Just as an example, right? So certain facts are important. Not everything is a multiple choice. Some of them are fill-ins. There's a couple of short answers, written responses that I will grade. I'll be just transparent with everybody. I've tried to cut back a little bit on the written responses. When the class went from 80 to 120 to 192, there's not enough tea on the planet to get me through a grading written exams for 192. But I do like you to write. I want you to be able to explain something. So there are a couple of short answer questions at the end of the exam, right? Well, the point here about multiple choice versus correct answer, I try and be as unambiguous as I can. So I will never set a multiple choice that gives you 5 choices that says, A, C, but not B, D, and E, those kinds of silliness, right? It's a question, there are 5 choices, and those choices should be clear and obvious. If the question is focusing on a number, if it's a quantitative question, right? So in other words, if I was to say, the population of the world is, or the population of the world is, and I give you 5 choices, I would never say 7.71, 7.72 billion, 7.73 billion. Then you kind of go, well, it could be any of the above, right? I will give you very clear breaks in your choices that should be clear and obvious, if that makes sense to everybody. Okay, this is the approach I take, right? There are 4 types of multiple choice answer or question that I pose. One is knowledge, the recall of information, okay? Definitions, dates, events, directions, big stuff, right? Not how much oil does Liberia use in the month of March, okay? Not gonna happen, but big important things that we've talked about. Hang on to your question, David. I'll get back to it in just a little bit. So there's knowledge-based questions. There's comprehension, which is the interpretation of some information that I will give you. And I'm going to give you an example of each one, right? There's application, which is using something to solve a problem. And then there is also analysis, right? An analytical type question, breaking down the material into parts. And I sprinkle the multiple choice through the exam across these 4 types of questions. Okay, so let me give you an example. All right, here's a knowledge-based question about what percent of the world lives in acute poverty. 0.2%, 2%, 20%, 35%, 50%. Now, don't panic if you don't know this, because this is not a question that we specifically talked about. I showed you a graph of decreasing poverty over time and, something like that. But this is one that you would need to know, right? If we had talked about poverty in a huge amount of detail. And you can see that the choices here are pretty broad, right? There's a factor of 10 between 0.2 and 2%, and then 20, 35, and 50%. So it would never be 18%, 18.5%, 19%, 19.5%, and so on, right? So that's a knowledge-based question. The answer, incidentally, here is 20%, right? In acute poverty, just as a broad number. So that's a knowledge-based question, right? Here is a comprehension type question. Utilitarian conservationists tend to believe that resources should be saved because they are important. You've got 5 choices. Why is it a comprehension? Well, you need to understand what utilitarian conservationism is. We talked about that with Teddy Roosevelt, remember? Pragmatic utilitarian conservationism as opposed to John Muir's preservationist ethic. And utilitarians tend to believe that resources should be saved because A, as a home for wildlife, B, in the conservation of aesthetic values, C, to our understanding of the biosphere, D, for a strong economic system, and E, used by all living things. Well, remember, utilitarian conservationists believe that we should be using our resources, conserving them, but using them for humankind here and now in terms of providing income, jobs, and securing our economic system, right? So that would be D as an example there. Comprehension, understanding. Okay. All right. Here is an analysis type question. The doubling time for the following curve is A, constant, B, unpredictable, C, continually increasing, D, continually decreasing, and E, none of the above. The curve shows population over time, right? So here's just a heads up to everybody. Right? A lot of people, and I do this when I'm in an in-person class, the majority of people read that and go, the doubling time for the following curve is, and they will put in D, continually decreasing, because the curve is going down, right? That's not the right answer. Okay, this is why it's an analytical question, right? The population is going down over time, meaning that as the population is decreasing, okay, it's taking longer for the population to double, right? It's taking longer and longer. As that population is going down over time, that means the R is going down over time, right? The rate of natural increase is going down over time. And the doubling time, remember, is 70 divided by the rate of natural increase. So in various time intervals, the doubling time is actually going up, getting longer and longer and longer over time. Is an analytical type question. And then here is an application of a concept. The concept is growth rate, right? So if the growth rate was 10%, the population would double every what? 2, 7, 25, 55, or 125. Okay, well, the answer there is 7, because remember, that's the rule of 70, right? 70 divided by the rate of natural increase, or 10%, right? So let me stop there and see if you have any questions on that aspect.
What was the answer to the previous question about on the chart?
This one here is C, right? The doubling time is continually increasing. Even though the slope's going down, that slope is showing the actual population going down over time, which means if you were to take this first point, let me just pull it up again here, right? So if you were to take this first point over here, that's a high population, then in the middle, the population's lower, and here the population's lower. That by definition, it must mean that the growth rate is high here, the growth rate is lower, the growth rate is lower still, right? So you're dividing 70 by a continually declining growth rate. Does that make sense?
Yes,
So.
thanks.
Yeah, you bet. Question from Rory. For application questions with numerical answers, will we need a calculator? Yep, you'll need to do some little calculations in a scribble piece of paper. So I have no problem. For the rule of 70, it's always 10%. Nope, incorrect, Keegan. The rule of 70 is it's always 70 divided by whatever the percentage is, right? If your growth rate's 10%, then it's 10. If your growth rate's 1%, then you divide it by 1. If the growth rate is 100%, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? The 70 is always the numerator. The rate of natural increase, the growth rate, is always the denominator. Keegan, did that clarify that?
Yes, thank you.
You bet. Do we need to know how to calculate total fertility rate? Nope, but you need to know what the total fertility rate is. And I'll go through the study guide in just a second as well. Okay. All right, so let me stop that share and let me then pull up the study guide. Let's see, do I have the PDF open? Maybe. Well, my computer is doing something very, very strange here. Are you guys seeing the study guide here?
Yes.
How weird. Okay, cool. Well, that's good because I'm seeing it on one screen and I'm seeing the other thing on the other screen. All right, so here's the study guide. So let me talk a little bit here about, how I've set this up.
Can you make it bigger, please?
Yeah, sure can. Thanks for that. Hang on one sec. Let me do that. All right. Better?
Much better.
Best aristist. Okay, cool. This is also uploaded under the review on D2L. Okay, so one of the joys about university is that every faculty is different, right? And some faculty in your careers here will give you study guides that are pages and pages long and lots of details. So I don't. What I do is I will give you an overview of the most important concepts and principles and issues and aspects of the course, right? Things that you should be able to, that you should understand and be able to talk to me about in an exam, okay? And I'll come back to the question earlier about lecture notes versus book. So let me just go through this and give you the quick overview of what I see as the big key things, right? We talked about the history of environmentalism. Okay, so you need to understand utilitarian conservation versus John Muir, what we talked about in terms of John Muir's preservation ethic. Okay. What was the emphasis of Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring, as an example? What do we mean by the Anthropocene? What do we mean by the Great Acceleration? Okay. Two things that we talked about. The bullet point here, the principles underpinning the environmental ethics, meaning what makes an informed decision, how do we put a price on nature, and importantly, intrinsic versus instrumental value. So we talked about that in lecture, and that's also covered in the book as well, right? The basic premise of the scientific method. What do I mean by basic premise? Well, so how does it work, right? How does that flow chart work in terms of an observation, then a hypothesis? What is a hypothesis? How does a hypothesis differ from a theory? How does a theory differ from a law, for example? Okay, so there won't, we spent 10 minutes on that, so there won't be 100 questions on that, probably one or two. Okay, okay, so what is, let's scroll up here a second. So what is R? What is the rate of natural increase? So what do we mean by the rate of natural increase? What is the doubling time? How do we calculate and apply both? So I've just given you an example of that. How do we apply the doubling time, right? If I give you a population, a birth, number of births, and the number of deaths, you should be able to calculate the rate of natural increase. You should be able to calculate the doubling time. The difference between J and S curves and the implications of each type of growth, right? So in other words, remember J was the biotic potential. Okay? S curves are what populations generally do over time. This part here being the environmental resistance that slows growth down, and what are the factors that make up environmental resistance. Okay, an important one here, how to apply the demographic indices. In other words, we've got total fertility rate, infant mortality, zero population growth, and so on. And I'm going to be very open with you here, and I put it here. I'm going to give you a table of data from a number of countries. Okay, you haven't seen the data before, but as long as you understand what total fertility rate is, what income is, what infant mortality is, what literacy is, things like that, you should be able to answer some questions on what country is country A, what country is country B, for example, just based on the numbers, right? So if I give you a total fertility rate of 1.2, clearly that country is not, you know, the Democratic Republic of Congo, right? Does that make sense to everybody? So you'll be given a chance to apply those demographic indices. I often get questions here, demographic characteristics of various regions, countries, right? So I'm not going to go in, I absolutely don't expect you to know all the details about growth rates and birth rates and death rates and growth rates and so on from all the countries in the world, clearly not. Just use the slides and the regions and the countries that we talked about, right? So in other words, if I was to say to you, what do you think the current rate of natural increase in the world is as a percentage? Well, it's not 100%, right? It's not 50%, because if it was 50%, that means we would be doubling the population every 1 point something years, okay? So you should be able to understand the concepts and the possibility of different countries. This is another important one, right? We spent some time talking about age structure diagrams. I think there's at least 3 questions on age structure diagrams, what they mean, and what countries would potentially look like. So a question here from Queen. So we'll need to know specific examples, or are they developed or developing? No, it'll be more developed or developing, but for an age structure diagram, I could give you some specific countries, right? But again, those countries would not be, you know, how do I say this? It wouldn't be an age structure diagram of, let's compare Canada to Italy to Sweden to the United Kingdom to the United States. They would all be very similar, right? They're all developing countries. I mean, they're all developed countries. So there's going to be some obvious standout ones, right? Human dependency on land, right? That is going to be there. That's an important diagram. That was the one that showed cropland over time, cropland per area, population over time, okay? And how population growth is going to impact our ability to feed the world. And we can come back and just revisit that once I've gone through this. Okay. All right, moving on. The difference between an economic reserve and a resource, we talked about that. The environmental impacts of reserve extraction. So, you know, what happens when you go after coal or oil? What are some of the environmental impacts? The breakdown of global energy sources by type and location, meaning where do we get our energy from? So I am not concerned whether you know that we get 33% or 32% or 34% of our energy from oil, right? Broadly speaking, where do we get most of our energy from? Well, I'd like you to know that we get most of it from fossil fuels, 85%, right? I also don't expect you to know the details of electricity generation state by state, right? That would be, again, that would be too specific, right? So there's far fewer specific type percentage questions, right? Please don't go and memorize all of how Pennsylvania versus Nevada generates its electricity. Too specific, okay? But I would like you to know where the US imports its oil from, right? Is it Canada, is it Venezuela, is it Saudi Arabia, and which is the most important ones? And I would certainly like you to be able to explain the difference between conventional and unconventional resources or reservoirs, right? Oil sands versus conventional oil. We did talk about the various grades of coal, right? From anthracite to lignite. Generally, the environmental impacts associated with coal and oil. And I've just mentioned this US oil production and the implications of importing oil. And then I just highlighted these, I think, as you know, some of the most important diagrams that you will come across in the text. And then let me just finish here before I open it up for questions at this stage. One of the questions earlier on was, do we focus on the lecture notes or do we focus on the book, right? So I always say, absolutely let the lecture notes drive your preparation, right? I hope I'm held accountable to this. I never go into the book and just pull out some fact from a page, right? Anyone can do that. That doesn't test anything. But I would hope that you've read the chapter, and I'd hope that that the book helps clarify and explain, right? That's the bottom line, okay? Yeah, there are some things that we just won't have time to cover. So there's a box on certainty, scientific uncertainty. I'm not going to ask you a question on scientific uncertainty, but it's good to read and might help you answer a question if it's phrased a little differently. I will tell you there is one question towards the end of the exam that is out of 5 marks or worth 10% of the total exam. It's a written question, okay? And it's based on one of the important diagrams. And there I really want to, you don't have to write an essay, but really think about it. So if it's worth 10% of the exam, if it's worth 5 out of 50, don't just put one word down. Okay, think about what I'm asking. What are the implications of the diagram? So let me stop there and see what specific questions anybody has, and then I'm happy to pull up the PowerPoint slides and spend the next 22 minutes, and even longer if we need to stay afterwards.
Can you just go over how to read like the age structure diagram?
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. So I tell you what, why don't we, as we go through this may take a minute, but let me see if I can do this and do this reasonably expeditiously. Why don't I just pull the diagrams up? Did that change to the population diagram, Chinera? Okay, cool.
Yes.
All right, give me 1 sec. Let me scroll down. It might just be easier if we do it this way. Whoop, let's do it. There we go. All right, age structure diagram. So remember, the age structure diagrams break down a population, right, based on the number of males on the left-hand side, the number of females on the right-hand side, and the percentage of the number of males that occur in a particular age group, right? So let me just take the left hand, let me change colors here to a greeny green, okay? So here's the number of males, here's the number of females, and this shows, and it's not actually written on the scale here, but this would be percentage. So this may be, 5% of this population occurs between the age of 0 to 5 years. Then this may be 4% occurs between the ages of 5 to 10. And then a little less occur between the ages of 10 to 15. All those in this red at the bottom here are pre-child producing years. Then we've got the percentage of males and the percentage of females that occur in the orange. And this grouping from 15 to 44 is technically the child producing years. Then we've got the percentage of the population that occurs post-child producing years. Does that make sense, Chinera, what you're looking at here?
Yes, it does.
Okay, and so if we just go to the next one for a moment here, show something similar. So here I've got the percentages on just because I drew these out from the data. So again, you've got age here, 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 15. So that is pre-child producing. 15 up to 44, that's child producing, and so on. And you're looking at India on the left here. So here's India in 2010. That's a population with a very wide base, which means these young people are soon going to pop here into the child producing realm versus something that looks, that looks like that, which is a much more stable population, right? Each age group is distributed more or less evenly, and then it thins up towards the top as the population ages. So the shape of the population diagram will tell you about the potential of a population to be expanding in the short term, stable, or even declining.
So pretty much the the top part of the diagram is like the older generation and they're gonna have less kids, and then vice versa.
Right, right, absolutely.
Hmm.
Yay.
So,
Let me get to Keegan, and then I'll keep an eye on the chat. I'll come back and address the chats in just a second. So let's just go to the verbal ones, then I'll come back to the
sorry. So for India, what you're saying is that since it's wider, like there's more people on like the younger bracket and the childbearing, and then versus the United States, it's more like stable.
Yeah. So in
Okay.
2010, India had, so here we go. In 2010, India had, 10% of, 10% of the population was of the male down here, and 10% of the total population were female. So you've got, 20% of the population are young kids, and you add another, so that's 40, 50%. You've got half the population are in this bottom region over here, right? A very, very large young population. So what happens when those then all age another 10 to 15 years, and that wide base ends up in the child producing years? Population goes up dramatically, right? Whereas if you've got something that looks like that, okay, and each age group goes up sequentially, then your population would be stable over time. May or may not be just replacing itself, but it would be stable over time. Does that make sense, Keegan?
Yes, thank you.
All right, sweet. Okay, let me just go back to the chat here for a second. Okay, let's answer. All right, Lauren, where do people typically miss the most points? That's an interesting question. I'm not sure. That's an interesting question, Lauren. I'm not sure I have a real answer to that, because what I do is I look at the statistical breakdown of questions. And I always do that because, just to double check that there's not a problem. And I've had that on occasion. I hope I've corrected them, but sometimes you'd set a question and 5% of the students would get it right. And you go, well, that doesn't make sense, right? And it may just be wrong. I think on this exam, you need to get to the short answer question, right? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the short answer question somewhere early on in the exam. I'm not going to leave it right till the end, right? So I'll put that short answer question early on, and so that's an important one, one to get. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a great answer to that, Lauren. Okay, Lindsay, just confirming it's chapters 1 through 3. It is chapters 1 through 3 up until the end of oil. So from natural gas onwards is not on the exam, right? So there's no natural gas, nuclear, or renewables. Lynn's question, is it 5% male or 5% of the population? It's 5% of the population. Okay, Jenna, does the lighter color outside the tan mean anything in the diagram? Are we supposed to look at the shape as a whole and ignore the colors? Jenna, do you have a microphone? Can I just ask you a question on there?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, is your question related to this diagram, the H structure diagram?
I didn't see before. I just realized that they're labeled as with the years. So I guess my follow-up question would be, on the test, would it explicitly ask us like 2010 or 2050?
Okay, yeah, I hear you. On the test, I won't give you anything dealing with years. I'm just going to give you straight countries and a particular H structure diagram. So I'm not going to ask you to compare two different time periods.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Audrey, is the exam set up like the quizzes regarding not being able to go back? Yeah, unfortunately it is. I need you to focus on a question, do it, and move on. Okay, Lindsay, got it. Okay, cool. All right. Here's an interesting one. Will we be able to go back and look at our quizzes? How do I do that? It's a good question,
In some
Whitney.
of my other classes, you're able, like once you complete the quiz and you get your grade and everything, you're able to like go back to it and go through it and see like the correct answers, what you got right, what you got wrong, just to use for like study purposes.
Okay, that's a great point, Lindsay.
I think
sorry,
it's already
Whitney.
open. I think we can go and see it.
I just tried and I wasn't able to see mine.
Okay.
I
Let
am
me-
able to see mine. I just double checked and it's open, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
Okay,
I might be clicking the wrong thing.
Laurel,
No, I
can you
couldn't find either of them.
Laurel, can you see what you got right and wrong on your quizzes?
Yes, I can. I got 100, so I don't know if it would show me the correct answer if I gotten it wrong, but I can see the questions and all that.
Mine showed me the correct answer, the one that I got wrong.
Okay, cool. All right, I'll go back and make sure those quizzes don't have I don't think they have a closing time on them, but I'll double check that.
I clicked the wrong thing. I can see mine now.
Way to go, Whitney.
You just have to click like on the attempt and then it'll take you to it.
Okay, all right, cool, thanks for that. All right, question from Meredith. Are we going to have to find the increasing growth rate with the formula and then doubling time, or are the questions that use the formulas just one part of the questions? Well, I'm definitely gonna give you a question where I give you a population, number of births and number of deaths, and you're gonna have to calculate the rate of natural increase, right? I won't give you that formula, Meredith, that's just simply birth rate minus the death rate. So I'm gonna assume you know that. And I will assume you know the doubling time is 70 divided by the growth rate. Did that answer that? Let me know if it didn't.
Yes.
Okay. All right, young environmentalists. Who's got something else? Can you go over the human dependency on land graphs again? Should I? Maybe.
Yes, please.
Please.
Okay, yeah. 1 sec. All right. Holly, is it showing up? Is that what you're looking at here? Okay, thank you. Madison, yeah, you can have a calculator for sure. All righty. So here is the human dependency on land. Let me just get the annotate. All right. What color should we use? Let's use blue. So this is showing 3 things, right? Here is the land that is put under cropland annually up through until 2018, right? So starting from 1960, and that the vertical cropland arrows, as you can see from the legend on the top, that refers to this axis here. So this is cropland in billions of hectares, right? So in 2018, we had 1.56, and if you go straight across, and you come to here, that ends up being about 1.56 billion hectares of land under crops, not pasture, but crops, right? Then we've got this one, population, and that refers to this axis here, billions, okay? So all good there. And then you got the one in red, which is 1 divided by the other, right? So this is this axis here, okay? The arable land expressed in how many hectares per capita. So we've got 1.6 billion hectares divided by the population in 2018. That leaves you at this point here, which is about 0.2 hectares per person. Does that make sense to everybody? So that's what you're looking at, right? So the bottom line is that, yeah, we've seen an increase, right? We've seen an increase in the area under cropland. It's gone from about, 800 million hectares to about 1.56 billion. So the area under cropland has doubled from there to there. Oops, going out over here. Everybody see that? Sorry, it's gone from about, I'm looking at the wrong axis. It's gone from about 1.3 billion hectares to about 1.5 billion hectares. Okay. In the span of almost 60 years, the challenge is population has gone from 3 billion to 7.8 billion, right? So the growth in human population has outpaced the area that we've been able to put under agriculture, right? And you see that manifest in the red curve here. So as you've increased population dramatically during the 20th century, the area per person that we get to grow food on has gone down, right? It's gone down from about, well, not quite a half a hectare per person, but somewhere up here, but it's gone down dramatically, right? To something around about 0.2. So there's been about a 50% drop in the area available to humans. So how have we kept feeding people? Well, we've kept feeding people by doing things like the Green Revolution and increasing crop yields, right? And mechanizing agriculture and fertilizers. And heaven forbid we should mention the word genetically modified food, right? All of that has been able to increase crop yields. Now, the implications of this diagram is what happens from 2020 onwards, okay? As population keeps growing, and let's say we get to 9 billion people, we know we're going to get to at least 9, and it's probably going to be 9.5, right? As population grows, what's the implication? Well, the implication is if we keep arable land at 1.6 billion hectares, in other words, these vertical lines just keep doing this for the next 30 years, okay, then the only thing that can happen is that the arable land per hectare has to keep going down and down, right? We have to keep producing food on smaller and smaller and smaller plots per person, relatively speaking, if we keep the area under cropland the same, right? Or we can say, no, let's keep the arable land at about 1/4 of a hectare per person. And as the population goes up, then we would simply have to increase the area under cultivation. So the implications of that are, as a population grows through time, how do we feed the world? Do we feed the world by just increasing crop yields and not being able to put any more land under production? And I can, the Cliff Notes version that we talked about in class is that we already have as much land as we can afford to put under agriculture. Guys, there isn't another 500 million hectares just sitting there waiting to be plowed, right? We're already plowing up steep-sided slopes. We've already lost huge areas due to chemical pollution and erosion. And oh, by the way, we're going into tropical forests and cutting those down to plant. So that's the implications of that diagram, if that helps. Whitney, can you please explain the difference between the Anthropocene and the Great Acceleration? The Anthropocene is an era or a period of time in which humans have become the dominant change agent with regards to the environment, right? However you define that time, whether you say it's post-World War II, whether you say it's the dawn of agriculture, whether you say it's 1,000 years ago, whether you think it's post-industrial revolution, but a period where humans are the dominant force on the planet. The Great Acceleration refers specifically to the acceleration in human land use and all of those socioeconomic indicators post-World War II, right? Coming out of World War II. What's important about Roosevelt and forest preservation? So yeah, you bet, Whitney. So the key points there, right, is Roosevelt and through Gifford Pinchot, who became the first the director of the US Forest Service. The idea there was to conserve resources, but use them. So you would grow forests, cut them down and regrow them. So that was utilitarian or pragmatic resource conservation, to conserve our resources for the long run, but use them for the good of the people, right? For the greatest good for the longest time. That is different to Muir's preservation ethic, which led to the National Park Service. Hands off preservation. Nature has a right to exist in and of itself. Okay. What about Carson? Yeah, so Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, and her impact was really, for the first time, placing an emphasis on the magnification, the accumulation of pollutants in the environment, specifically pesticides and herbicides and things like DDTs, right? So a very focused examination of human impact in terms of pollutants within our ecosystems. I think that would probably be good enough, Gabby.
Are you still having your in-person office hours tomorrow?
Indeed, I am. Let me take a look at tomorrow. We've got dean candidates on campus. I'll send out an email about this. I will have my office hours. I'll send out an email, Janira. I'll be on office hours at 8 o'clock. And then I've got sporadic things during the day. But what I'll do is I'll say in the email to you all, if you need to get a hold of me, just email me or just see if I'm in my Zoom office. And then if not, just email me and I'll arrange a pop into Zoom for sure. Even if it's tomorrow night, that's just fine.
How many written questions are there?
How many what?
Like written questions, short
Oh,
answer.
written questions. There's 3 or maybe 4 kind of fill in the blanks. And then there's 2 written questions. One's the one that's worth 10%, worth 5 out of 50. So you won't have to write tons and tons.
I have a question about one of the graphs. It's the net international migration during 2010 to 2020 and per capita income. That it's the figure 2.19.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm specifically supposed to be pulling off from it.
Yeah. No, good question, Dominic. Hang on one second. Let me. Okay, this one here. Is this showing up there, Dominic?
Yeah, that's the right one.
Okay, cool. Okay, so yeah, the big take-home message here, right, is so you've got income along this axis here, right? So this is wealth, $150, $3,000, $20,000. That's annual per capita income, right? So that's just horizontally partitioning countries out between lower middle, upper middle, and high income countries. So poorer to richer. And on the vertical axis here is anything above this line is positive net immigration into a place, and this is net immigration out of a place, right? So there's some nuances here, Gavin. The general take home here is that those countries that are experiencing, and the size of the country deals with the population of that country, right? So what you're seeing here is that the wealthy countries here, right? So these are all in the high income countries, are the ones that are experiencing the greatest immigration, with the United States, of course, being well up here, right? Germany, the UK, Canada. So wealthy and rich taking people in, right? And low income countries down here are the countries that are losing people, but that's a simplification, right? Because there are other things going on here. So here you have a country like Jordan and Lebanon, okay, and Turkey. These are lower middle and upper middle income. Look at a place like Jordan. Why is Jordan experiencing positive net immigration? Well, right next door, okay, is Syria, the Syrian Arab Republic, okay? So that is a refugee flux there. That's a refugee flux there. Okay, so that's another nuance there. And then we have countries like, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. These countries are quote unquote losing people. They're experiencing net immigration, and that's not a refugee. That's very often high-tech industry people that are immigrating in this direction to the higher income countries, right? Then you've got fairly wealthy countries like Venezuela that are losing people because of the socio-political environment. So I don't know if that helped, Gavin, but it's just a way to look at which countries are experiencing a net influx or outflux of.
Oh yeah, it was the part where I was like, you're wanting us to connect the reason as to why there's this immigration.
Yeah, size of the circle represents the country, the population of the country. But yeah. Is there a definitive answer to the question, how do we put a price on nature? It's a good question. The answer is no, right? There's no definitive answer. So how do we put a price on nature? Well, you could, if you were to answer that, if I was to say, how do you put a price on nature, then, you know, you could, if it was me, I would probably say, well, it depends, right? It depends if you're trying to put an instrumental price on nature or an intrinsic price on nature. And then I would discuss it from there. So feel free, our time is officially up, but I'm going to hang around for about 10 or so minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think
Yep, all good, all good.
Thank you.
Uh-huh,
Thank you.
you got it.
Professor.
That is me.
Yes, I wanted to, so I'm traveling tomorrow for Big 12s, indoor Big 12s track and field. I wanted to ask if possible, I could take the exam on next week or something.
Yeah, so what I'm doing is I've had emails from people who are swimming and running and jumping and doing all sorts of athletics. That's absolutely fine. I'll send out an email to all of you as well as part of this general study guide email. Take care of what you need to take care of, and then we'll circle back if you want to take it. My preference would be to take it as soon as you get back from your meet, but we can just work on that one-on-one too.
All right, I'll email you also so that.
Okay, sounds good, buddy.
All right, thank you.
You got it.
I'm in the same situation. I already emailed you.
You did.
But what goes next? Like, should I re-email you, or like when do I know when I'm going to take the exam?
No, I think what we'll do is let's see, what's the best way to do this? I think what I'll probably do, Mariana, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, is I will set up once the exam is done and through on Thursday, and I'll go through. I've got the list of people who have recognized absences, and then I'll go through and keep it open, probably for a 48-hour window or something over the weekend through to Monday or something like that. We'll talk again via email, but it'll be open for you to go in and take it when you need to take it.
Okay, awesome. Is it okay if I email you on Saturday once my race is
Yeah,
done?
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor.
You bet.
Bye.
I have a question.
Hi, Ashley.
So I emailed you and I was saying how I have extended time, but my problem is I have a class before this class and then the lab for this class after. So when should I take it?
That's an excellent question. What is the rest of the day looking like tomorrow?
So the only problem is both my tests for your test got moved to Thursday and my other one did too. So I'm taking my marketing one at 8 a.m. till like basically when your class starts.
Okay.
So I'm done with classes after 3.
Okay. But you probably want to have a little break and get a coffee or something. I tell you what, Ashley, why don't you just email me and just give me a window that works for you.
Okay.
I'll set it up for that.
Perfect. Thank you. Bye.
You got it. Bye. Right, we have 3 takers. We have Audrey, Kevin, and Vin.
Hi, I don't have a specific question. It's more just, well, you already described how to study. I'm just really nervous because I can memorize things, but the whole analysis and it doesn't come as easily to me.
Okay, so I have a suggestion. I don't have a magic wand, but I have a suggestion. Why don't you go ahead and spend some time prepping, and then sometime tomorrow, preferably tomorrow afternoon, later tomorrow afternoon, something like that. Sorry, I just need to make a note here. I'm like a squirrel, so if something runs by and it goes and I just need to make a note of this email. Okay. Yeah, just send me an email, Audrey, and I don't know what tomorrow looks like, and let's do a Zoom, and then the only way I can judge where you're at is if we do it verbally. So if I say to you, all right, Audrey, explain to me this diagram, talk out loud and explain this, explain that, then I think that would make you feel better. I hope it would.
Okay,
I just
that would
don't,
be
yeah, I don't have any sort of real magical techniques on how to go beyond that.
Can I also do that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, Vin. Happy to do that. Just send me an email. We'll set up a time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
great. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Have a nice day.
Thanks.
Yeah, I had a question about not I watched the last lecture because I was just watch it, but I had a question about the nuclear lecture. So is the amount of heat the nuclear power plants produce, is that an issue for the environment as well? Like I heard that they produce a ton of heat.
A ton of what?
Heat.
No, not really. No. So, I mean, they produce a ton of heat, but all that heat is really contained within the reactor core, right? So, yeah, they produce huge heat, and that's used to heat the water to create steam and all of that.
Yeah.
And all of that hot water goes through the condensers, right, and gets condensed back into liquid water once it's gone through the steam cycle. So it's really not a huge issue in terms of heat for the environment. The one thing it can do is there's some pretty warm water that comes off some of those power plants. So you do have what we call thermal pollution in some instances, but generally the power plants control that. But in terms of an overall heating of the environment, no.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I was just curious because I was watching this thing about nuclear, and one of the person, it was kind of like a back and forth about should we do nuclear, should we not? And one of the persons said the heat it generates is problematic, but it doesn't seem like that.
No, it's not. It really isn't. It's kind of interesting because it's you know, as hopefully we'll get to at the end of this, everything comes at a price, right?
Yeah.
Both in terms of cents per kilowatt hour and whatever your environmental impact of a particular technology is.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of just, you know, misinformation, you know, out there.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked about kind of what they were saying. I don't know, maybe I was not looking at a great one.
No,
but,
no, heat is generally not an issue.
All right, perfect. Hey, thank you so much.
All right, have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Can you open up the